So, who are you? I mean, really, how would you actually describe yourself? Are you friendly, creative, maybe a little quirky? For as long as we've been human, we have been trying to answer that one single fundamental question. So today, let's dive into the science of who we are. Would you believe me if I told you one of the very first personality theories came from the ancient Greek physician Hippocrates? Yeah, he thought your entire personality came down to the balance of four bodily fluids, or humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. A little messy, right? But it just goes to show you how long we've been trying to fit ourselves into these neat little boxes. And that quest, well, it just kept going right on through history. We went from the four humors in Greece and the five elements in traditional Chinese medicine to Freud's psychoanalysis in the early 1900s, where your personality was basically a constant battle between your id, ego, and superego. Then you get humanistic psychology with folks like Maslow focusing on our potential for growth. And this whole long road leads right up to today with, even those BuzzFeed quizzes that'll tell you which type of sandwich you are. The methods have definitely changed, but that desire to understand ourselves, it's as strong as ever. Now look, while all those early theories were super interesting, they all had a bit of a problem. How do you scientifically measure what someone sees in an ink blot? Or how do you quantify how much someone's id is in charge at any given moment? Modern psychology needed a more empirical approach. And that just means an approach based on observation and actual evidence, not just abstract ideas. They needed clear, measurable standards. And that need really sparked two major new perspectives in the 20th century. So the first of these is what we call trait theory. Instead of trying to dig deep into the unconscious or focusing on some distant growth potential, trait theorists decided to look at what's right there in front of them, our stable, lasting patterns of behavior. There's this great story, legend really, that a young psychologist named Gordon Allport went to visit Sigmund Freud. And Allport tells him this story about a little boy he saw on a train who was just obsessed with being clean. After he finishes, Freud just stares at him and asks, "And was that little boy you?" Allport was stunned. He realized Freud was always digging for some deep hidden meaning, when, you know what, maybe the explanation was way simpler. Sometimes a boy on a train is just a boy on a train. And that moment really set Allport on a new path. He decided to focus on the here and now. He wasn't so much interested in explaining why we have certain traits, but in simply describing them. And that became the whole foundation of trait theory, this idea that we can define personality through these fundamental conscious characteristics. Okay, so decades of research eventually boiled all these descriptions down into what we now call the Big Five personality traits. It's pretty much the most widely accepted framework we have today, and you can remember them with this handy little mnemonic: OCEAN. Let's break them down, one by one. First up, O is for openness. Now, this isn't about how much you share your feelings. It's about how open you are to new experiences. So someone high in openness is probably imaginative, independent, they like variety. On the other end, someone low in this trait prefers routine and the comfort of the familiar. Think of it like this. Are you the person who always asks, "What's new on the menu?" or the one who's got their one favorite dish and sticks to it? Next up, C for conscientiousness. This trait measures your level of organization and discipline. A highly conscientious person is really careful, organized, disciplined, while someone on the low end of this scale tends to be more impulsive and, a bit disorganized. And get this, of all five traits, this one is the single most reliable predictor of success in school and at work. Pretty interesting, right? Then we've got E for extroversion. This is probably the one you're most familiar with. It's basically the spectrum from being super sociable and fun-loving, someone who literally draws energy from a crowd, all the way to being more shy and reserved, someone who recharges their batteries through solitude. A is for agreeableness, and it's all about how you get along with other people. A highly agreeable person, they're usually soft-hearted, trusting, helpful, a natural team player. In contrast, someone low in agreeableness might be a little more suspicious, uncooperative, and even competitive. And finally, N is for neuroticism, which is really all about emotional stability. A person high in neuroticism is often anxious, maybe a little insecure. Someone low on this trait, meaning they're more emotionally stable, is typically calm, secure, and self-satisfied. So the key takeaway here is that we all fall somewhere on the spectrum for each of these five traits, and that combination creates a totally unique personality profile for every single one of us. But that brings up a really good question. Are we always our traits? I mean, trait theory is fantastic at describing who we are on average, but it kind of struggles to explain why our behavior can change so much from one situation to the next. And that very limitation leads us to the second major modern theory, the social cognitive perspective. Just think about it for a second. Your traits might predict your average behavior really well, but they aren't a perfect script you have to follow. Even the most introverted person you know might get up and sing karaoke at a wedding. The most agreeable person might argue fiercely for a cause they truly believe in. The truth is, our personalities are way more flexible than we think because they're shaped by the context we find ourselves in. So this brings us to a fascinating concept from the psychologist Albert Bandura called reciprocal determinism. Just think of it as a constant feedback loop. It goes like this. First, your personality and your thoughts influence the kinds of environments you choose to be in. So an extrovert seeks out a party while an introvert chooses a library. Then, that very environment shapes you right back. The party energizes the extrovert, the quiet library reinforces the introvert's calm, and that makes both of them more likely to make similar choices in the future. We are both the creators and the products of our situations. It's a cycle. Now, a really key part of this whole perspective is something called your locus of control. Basically, where you feel the control in your life comes from. If you have an internal locus of control, you're the type of person who believes, I control my own destiny. But if you have an external locus of control, you tend to feel that my life is guided by outside forces. And that perception, it dramatically shapes how you approach every challenge and whether you see a setback as a lesson to learn from or just more proof that the world is against you. Okay, so we have these complex theories, right? From stable traits to these interacting situations. But how do psychologists actually, assess personality? What are the tools of the trade? Well, as you might guess, each school of thought has its own favorite methods. Psychodynamic theorists, they love projective tests like the Rorschach ink blot. The hope is that you'll project your unconscious thoughts onto a totally ambiguous image. Trait theorists, on the other hand, use personality inventories, those really long questionnaires like the Big Five tests. Social cognitive psychologists often rely on just direct observation because they believe the best predictor of your future behavior is your past behavior. And humanistic theorists might use interviews and questionnaires to compare a person's actual self with their ideal self. So all of this, all the theories, all the tests, all the debates, it's ultimately trying to get at one of the stickiest, most profound concepts in all of psychology, the self. And this is really where it all comes together. All of those years of research, from trying to interpret dreams and ink blots to analyzing massive data sets from questionnaires, it all funnels down into one profound central question. One of the most powerful ways psychologists try to get a handle on this is with the concept of possible selves. See, this self isn't just who you are right now. It's also a collection of who you might become. You have an ideal self you're aspiring to be, successful, loved, accomplished, and you probably have a feared self you want to avoid, lonely, failed, insecure. And it's the tension between these possible selves that acts like a powerful engine, motivating our actions and shaping the person we're becoming every single day. Which brings us right back to where we started. After you factor in our traits, our situations, our biology, and all of our experiences, can we ever truly pin down this thing we call a self? Is it some stable core at the center of our personality, or is it just an ever-changing story that we tell ourselves about who we are? Well, that remains one of life's biggest questions, and it's the very thing that keeps the science of personality moving forward.